Oh, you think this is indecent? I'll show you indecent. Gee, it's a little warm in my house. I don't think I feel like wearing a top anymore.
Oh, my God! Oh, Frank, you're leaving!
I don't remember the first time I watched Everybody Loves Raymond. I only remember that it was always there when the TV came on in the evening. Raymond arguing with his wife, the mother-in-law dropping her barbed remarks, the whole family sitting around the dinner table, all annoyed over the smallest things. Everything felt safe and familiar, like a sitcom you could turn on without having to think. But did you know that Everybody Loves Raymond was never born to be funny? The show began in a marriage counselor's office, with a male lead who nearly ran away before the first episode even aired, and a cast who barely spoke to each other off camera. Even the character who gets mocked the most throughout 9 seasons was built from 2 real-life brothers who didn't speak to each other for more than 15 years. Below are 20 behind-the-scenes facts about a family sitcom you thought was harmless, only to discover it's actually a mirror held up to everything no one wants to say at the dinner table. 20. The show was born in a therapist's office. Are you like me? There's something deeply familiar about Everybody Loves Raymond. A suburban house, a family dinner, laughter queuing up on schedule as if every conflict were just a minor inconvenience that could be brushed aside in 22 minutes. Back then, I thought this was a show written to help you unwind. Watch it, feel lighter, as if nothing had happened. But the truth is, Everybody Loves Raymond didn't start in a writer's room. It started in a marriage counselor's office. Years before the show aired, Phil Rosenthal sat across from his wife Monica in long therapy sessions. Week after week, the same issues came up. His parents interfering too much, her need for personal space, unannounced visits, concern that sounded a lot like control. Until one day, the therapist stopped, looked at Rosenthal and said bluntly, "You should write this down. This isn't just your story, it's every family's story." Rosenthal listened. He began recording every argument, every awkward meal, every sweetly sarcastic remark from his mother, every heavy silence from his father. When he brought the idea to CBS, he didn't call it a sitcom. He called it a documentary just with punchlines. And when the pilot aired in 1996, millions of people realized this wasn't Raymond's story, this was ours. 19. Ray Romano nearly quit before episode 1 even aired. I still remember watching Raymond for the first time. He stammered, hesitated, fumbled around his wife, his parents, every decision in his life. He looked like he was born to stand in the middle of that family, effortlessly so. But in real life, Ray Romano wanted nothing to do with it. Romano was a pure stand-up comic, living off tours and late nights in small clubs. One microphone, one person facing the audience, the freedom to say whatever came into his head. Sitcoms were the opposite, fixed schedules, hitting your mark, memorizing every line, cameras pointed straight at your face, and worst of all, being locked into one character for years. Romano turned down the role of Raymond 3 times. CBS didn't give up. They raised the pay, promised creative control, reassured him, just 13 episodes. If it failed, he could walk. In the end, it was Romano's wife who said the decisive line, "Stop being scared, just try it." He signed, and on the very first day of shooting, he panicked. Romano hated everything. Hated hitting marks, hated learning lines, hated the feeling that he didn't belong there. At one point, he pulled Phil Rosenthal aside and whispered, "I think I made a mistake." Rosenthal didn't argue. He simply said, "Give it 2 weeks. If you still hate it, we'll figure it out." Romano stayed. 2 weeks slowly turned into 9 seasons. And maybe that was a decision he almost never made. 18. The kitchen was a replica of a real memory. If there's one place in Everybody Loves Raymond that sticks with us, it's not the living room. It's the kitchen. A small table, old wooden cabinets, slightly yellow lighting. The biggest family battles in the Barone household all happened there. Careless remarks, uncomfortable silences, meals no one truly enjoys. What viewers didn't know is this: that kitchen wasn't imagined. It was an almost exact replica of the kitchen in Phil Rosenthal's childhood home in New York. The wall color, the cabinet placement, the table by the window. Even the magnets on the refrigerator were recreated from old photos of his mother's kitchen. When the set was finished, Rosenthal's mother visited the studio. She stepped into the kitchen, froze, and then burst into tears. For a few seconds, she forgot she was in Los Angeles. She instinctively reached for the coffee pot, exactly where it had always been in her own home. The entire crew fell silent. They understood. This was no longer just a set, it was a time machine. And every week, millions of people sat in that kitchen, without realizing they were sitting inside the real memories of another family. 17. Doris Roberts and Peter Boyle clashed constantly off camera. As a kid, I always thought Marie and Frank Barone were the kind of couple who argued for fun. One talked, the other sighed, and the laugh track arrived right on cue. But in real life, what happened between Doris Roberts and Peter Boyle wasn't acting. There was no shouting or open hostility, just silence. Between takes, they barely spoke. When the cameras stopped, each retreated to a corner of the set, like two planets with no shared orbit. The reason was professional opposites. Doris Roberts was a classically trained stage actress, meticulous, memorizing lines weeks in advance, believing discipline was a form of respect. Peter Boyle was the opposite. He trusted instinct. Show up when the camera rolled. Change lines to find a living moment. The clash was immediate. Roberts bristled when Boyle improvised. Boyle felt suffocated by her rigidity. The crew tried to mediate. It didn't work. Phil Rosenthal knew all of it, and he didn't put the tension out. He used it. Because sometimes an on-screen marriage only feels real when it's just as uncomfortable off-screen. 16. Patricia Heaton was never meant to be Deborah. You probably remember Deborah Barone as the archetypal, proper sitcom wife. Loving enough, patient enough, but always right at the edge of her tolerance. A familiar role in American sitcoms. In reality, Deborah almost wasn't Patricia Heaton's. The role was originally written for another actress, more famous, safer in the network's eyes. But audition after audition, something was always off. Too soft, too harsh, or so distant it felt empty. No one hit the balance. Patricia Heaton walked in when her career was stuck in limbo. She read with Ray Romano, and the room went quiet. She played Deborah as a woman who loved her husband but was exhausted by his family. Rosenthal looked at Romano. Romano nodded. The decision was made that day. Years later, Heaton admitted she had almost skipped the audition. She thought, just another background wife. But something told her to try once more. And that might as well audition ended up defining her entire career. 15. Brad Garrett hated playing Robert for the first 2 seasons. I've always remembered Robert Barone as the character who made people laugh the most, and the one who suffered the most, though I didn't realize it at the time. Brad Garrett realized it early. He hated the role for the first 2 seasons. Robert was written as a punching bag, the tall, awkward older brother who always lost. Every joke landed on him. Every scene ended with him looking foolish. Garrett felt turned into a gag. He dreaded going to set, sitting in the makeup room, staring at the script, wondering if he'd made a mistake taking the role. The turning point came in season 3. The writers began to see Robert differently. They gave him depth, made him a competent cop, gave him relationships that didn't exist just to fail. Let him win sometimes. And Garrett understood. Robert wasn't a loser. He was someone who never quit, even when he was always the one losing. From that moment, Garrett stopped fighting the character. He embraced the fragility, the bitterness, the desperate need to be loved, and turned Robert from a potentially one-note role into the quiet, emotional core of the entire show. 14. The twins who played Jeffrey and Michael were fired and then rehired. Hard to believe, but the kids on Everybody Loves Raymond weren't professional child actors. They were just real-life twins. Sawyer and Sullivan Sweeten dropped into a machine far bigger than they were. The first season was chaos. Crying mid-take, running off set, scenes that seemed tiny took hours to shoot. At first, the producers tried to be patient, but as schedules slipped and costs rose, patience ran out. They started looking for alternatives, auditioning new twin pairs, kids who were more manageable. Then something unexpected happened. Between seasons 1 and 2, the boys had a growth spurt. They understood direction, knew how to wait, followed cues. They stopped being a burden and became a natural part of the frame. Keeping them turned out to be the right call. Sawyer and Sullivan grew up on set. The audience watched them grow year by year. By the final season, they weren't playing the Barone kids anymore. They were the Barone kids. In 2015, Sawyer Sweeten died at 19. And only then did people realize some roles are kept, only for fate to take them away in the cruelest possible way. 13. Ray Romano rewrote his own lines every week. I always felt something strange watching Raymond talk, like he was thinking the lines up on the spot, not reading them off a page. That wasn't an accident. Ray Romano never fully trusted the script. Every week after receiving it, he took it home and started fixing anything that sounded wrong. Then he brought his version back to the writer's room and gently said, "What if we try it this way?" At first, the writers were irritated. But Phil Rosenthal saw something more important. Romano wasn't breaking structure, he was making the character breathe. To Romano, Raymond Barone wasn't a role, he was himself. Every awkward pause, every weak excuse, every helpless sigh came straight from real life. Rosenthal let him keep rewriting. Over time, the writers learned to write in Romano's voice. By the later seasons, the scripts were almost finished from the start because they were already written to that rhythm of breath. 12. Doris Roberts stole props from the set every week. Back then, watching the show, I always felt Marie Barone was the kind of person who could step right out of the screen and into my own kitchen. But Doris Roberts, that boundary never really existed. Doris loved playing Marie, and she loved the things Marie touched. Every week after filming, she would quietly slip a small item into her bag. A brooch, a kitchen ladle, a photo frame from the shelf. She called it a small rebellion. At first, the props department didn't notice, then they did. But instead of stopping her, they indulged her. They began setting aside items they knew Doris would like. A scarf, an apron, something very Marie. After 9 seasons, Doris Roberts had an entire room at home filled with Marie Barone's belongings. Cardigans, handbags, even the familiar ceramic rooster from the kitchen shelf. She said it helped her stay connected to the character between seasons. But really, Marie had seeped into her too deeply to let go. After the show ended, there were moments when Doris would wear one of Marie's cardigans, sit silently in her living room as if waiting for someone to walk into the kitchen. Friends who visited said it felt unsettling. Her house was starting to look more and more like the Barone home. To the point where no one was quite sure anymore, was Doris playing Marie, or had Marie never really left Doris? 11. Peter Boyle refused to rehearse the biggest scenes. Did you know that while the entire cast of Everybody Loves Raymond rehearsed for hours before each scene, Peter Boyle had a habit that drove everyone crazy. He didn't rehearse. The bigger the scene, the less prepared he appeared. While other actors ran lines, timed beats, blocked movements, Boyle sat in his dressing room reading the paper or doing crossword puzzles. When the director called, he waved it off. "I'll be ready when the camera rolls." And the most unbelievable part? He always was. This approach made Doris Roberts especially anxious. She needed rehearsal to feel safe, to know where everyone stood, what they'd say, how the scene would flow. Boyle's refusal to rehearse felt disrespectful to her, as if he wasn't taking the work seriously. Boyle believed Frank Barone was a man who reacted on instinct, rehearsed too much, and Frank would lose that rough edge. So Boyle let everything happen in the moment the camera rolled. The irritated grunts, the perfectly timed glares, the sudden walkouts that made the studio audience explode with laughter, all of it was unrehearsed. After 9 seasons, the crew stopped trying to change him. They understood something simple. Peter Boyle was just acting in a way no one else dared to. 10. The writer secretly observed Phil Rosenthal's real family dinners. I was genuinely surprised to learn that for years, Rosenthal invited his writers to Sunday dinners at his parents' house. His mother cooked, his father complained, and the writers sat quietly, watching. They watched how his mother weaponized guilt through seemingly harmless concern, how his father shut down conversations with a newspaper, how his wife smiled politely while screaming internally. Then they went back to the writer's room and turned it all into scripts. Rosenthal's mother, Helen, was the first to notice. She heard her own words coming out of Marie Barone's mouth, every sentence, every line of reasoning. At first, she was embarrassed. Then she became proud. She called Phil after every episode. "That was me, wasn't it?" And he answered, "Mom, when isn't it you?" His father was less amused. He didn't like being portrayed as gruff, distant, glued to his recliner. But Rosenthal told him, "Dad, America loves Frank." That didn't make him happier, but it made him complain less, because deep down he understood the show wasn't mocking them, it was making them immortal, in the memories of millions of other families. 9. The show nearly got cancelled after season 1. Looking back now, it's hard to believe Everybody Loves Raymond once stood on the edge of cancellation. But in 1996, that was the reality. When it premiered, the ratings were decent. Not a disaster, but not a breakout hit either. And for CBS, that wasn't enough. Midway through season 1, the network began to doubt it. Other projects took priority. Raymond was shuffled from time slot to time slot, trying to find its audience. Each move flattened the ratings even more. The cast felt it. Ray Romano went back to doing stand-up. Patricia Heaton started auditioning for other pilots. Everyone braced for the possibility that this was the end. Then, CBS made one last decision, almost out of desperation. They moved Everybody Loves Raymond to Monday night, airing it right after The Cosby Show. Everything changed overnight. Millions of viewers who stayed on after Cosby kept watching Raymond, and they stayed. Ratings surged. For the first time, the show had a real audience. By the end of season 2, Raymond wasn't just surviving, it had become a cornerstone. One-time slot, 9 seasons, saved in the most fragile way imaginable. 8. Patricia Heaton and Ray Romano didn't get along for 3 years. When I was younger, watching Everybody Loves Raymond, I always believed Raymond and Deborah felt real. They bickered over trivial things, but there was always this sense that no matter how annoyed they were, they would stay together. Off-screen, that feeling wasn't acting. For the first 3 seasons, Patricia Heaton and Ray Romano barely spoke. They came to set, hit their marks, said their lines, then each retreated to a corner. Romano was quiet, introverted, more comfortable with the crew than with fellow actors. Heaton was the opposite, open, chatty, always trying to build warmth. Romano didn't respond. Short answers, avoided eye contact, closed himself off. It wasn't until season 4, during an emotionally heavy scene, that something shifted. After the take, Romano walked over and said quietly, "That scene was really good." For the first time, Heaton understood. He didn't dislike it, he just didn't know how to open up. From then on, they talked more. By season 5, they were friends. By season 9, they were family. 7. The series finale was written 2 years before it aired. Some shows end because they get cancelled. Some end because they run out of ideas. Everybody Loves Raymond ended for a different reason. Its creator knew exactly when to stop. In 2003, while the show was still in season 8 and hugely popular, Phil Rosenthal sat down and wrote the entire final episode. A complete script, every line, every beat. He locked it in a safe in his office, knowing that if the day came, this would be the ending. 2 years later, CBS announced that season 9 would be the last. Rosenthal opened the safe and took out that script. At the table read, several cast members cried. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was painfully ordinary. A family sitting around a table, eating and talking. Still together, just as they had been for 9 years. An ending that didn't try to be remembered. It simply reminded us of something true. Families don't end with a big moment. They just carry on to one more meal. 6. Brad Garrett was nearly blind without his glasses. Watching Robert Barone walk into a room, awkward, slow, always half a beat behind. I used to think it was acting. The clumsy older brother, forever out of sync. The truth was simpler and far more unsettling. Brad Garrett can barely see without his glasses. Anything beyond 10 feet is just a blur. But Robert Barone doesn't wear glasses, so every time Garrett stepped onto set, he took them off and entered a world that was almost dark. He memorized where furniture was, counted steps to hit his mark, relied on muscle memory to move around. Sometimes he walked straight past his scene partners because he genuinely couldn't see them. The audience laughed, assuming it was Robert's doofiness. In reality, Garrett was just trying to survive the set. Ray Romano was the first to notice. Seeing Garrett squint during blocking, he quietly began helping. A light touch on the arm, a whispered 2 steps left. Soon the whole crew knew, and everyone started helping in small, discreet ways. Later, Garrett said playing Robert made him a better actor. When you can't trust your eyes, you have to trust your instincts. 5. The show made more money in syndication than during its original run. When Everybody Loves Raymond ended in 2005, it was seen as a solid success. Good ratings, loyal fans, no major scandals. Everyone assumed the story was over. In reality, it had just begun. Once the show entered syndication, it exploded in ways no one predicted. It aired 4, sometimes 5 times a day on TBS, TV Land, and local stations. People didn't watch out of curiosity, they watched out of habit. The TV went on during dinner, before bed, or just for background noise. Raymond became comfort food, and the money followed. Licensing, international sales, streaming. Within a few years, the revenue far surpassed the original broadcast run. The cast earned more in residuals than from their initial contracts. Romano once joked that he got paid every time someone in Ohio turned on the TV. It wasn't really a joke. 4. Doris Roberts fought CBS to keep Marie from being softened. To CBS, Marie Barone was too controlling, manipulative, and unpleasant. They wanted to soften her. More apologies, more moments of self-awareness, more remorse. Doris Roberts refused outright. She told the executives, if you make Marie nice, change the name of the show. Because Marie wasn't created to be likable, she was created to be real. In real life, mothers don't always apologize. They love their children in ways that can feel suffocating. Roberts understood that the moment Marie became self-aware, the entire structure of the show would collapse. So she crossed out the softened lines and deliberately kept the sharp edges that made viewers uncomfortable. Phil Rosenthal backed her. He knew his own mother was exactly like that. In the end, CBS gave up. Marie Barone stayed the same. Invasive, maddening, unbearable, and somehow still loved. Because real families are like that too. 3. Ray Romano had a clause allowing him to quit if his stand-up career exploded. When Ray Romano signed on to Everybody Loves Raymond, he wasn't thinking about the future. He was thinking about an exit. His lawyer negotiated an unusual clause. During the first 3 seasons, if Romano's stand-up career took off, he could leave the show immediately. CBS agreed because they didn't believe it would happen. It did. By season 2, Romano was headlining nationwide. By season 3, he was selling out theaters. He could have walked away from the sitcom, gone back to stand-up, made comparable money without being locked into a filming schedule. But he didn't. Because somewhere along the way, Romano realized he loved this job. He loved the family he'd built with the cast and the stories that could only be told here. When negotiating season 4, he tore up the exit clause and told CBS, "I'm staying." That was when he truly became Raymond. 2. The cast didn't know Peter Boyle was seriously ill in the final season. Few people knew that during season 9, Peter Boyle was slowly dying, and he told no one. Severe heart and respiratory conditions were draining his strength, but he still came to set, hit his marks, delivered every line. The cast only noticed he seemed more tired, resting between takes. Boyle smiled and said, "Just getting old." Only after the finale wrapped did the truth come out. Doctors had urged him to stop working and focus on treatment. Boyle refused. He told his wife, "I'm going to finish this show properly." And he did. He filmed the final episode, bowed to the live audience, hugged every member of the crew, and left. Peter Boyle passed away at the end of 2006. Only then did everyone understand he had given everything he had left to complete a goodbye. It was love for a family he chose to stay with until his final breath. 1. Phil Rosenthal's brother was the model for Robert, and they didn't speak for over 15 years. Few people know that Robert Barone wasn't just a character. He was a real person, Phil Rosenthal's brother, Richard. Every insecurity Robert carried came straight from real life, being overshadowed, mocked, dismissed. Richard had lived it all first. At the beginning, he accepted it. He watched the show and laughed at how accurate it was. But as the series went on, Robert became a weekly punchline. and millions of people were laughing at a character based on him. Richard stopped watching and stopped speaking to Phil. Rosenthal tried to explain that Robert was the heart of the show, the most deeply loved character. But to Richard, that didn't matter. All he saw was himself turned into a joke. They didn't speak for more than 15 years. Rosenthal has said it's the greatest regret of his life. The show gave him everything, but it cost him his brother. That was the price of telling the truth. Everybody Loves Raymond ended long ago, but it never really left our living rooms. Because behind the laughter were things we all recognize: parents who interfere too much, exhausted marriages, family dinners where everyone loves each other but doesn't know how to speak gently. The show didn't last because it was funny, it lasted because it was honest, so honest that sometimes the people closest to it had to pay the price. If these stories changed how you see the show, leave a comment and tell us which detail shocked or haunted you the most. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep digging into the hidden sides of the seemingly harmless films of our childhood. Thanks for watching to the end, and see you in the next video.